Quebec's small towns are beautiful during the day, snow-covered streets, glowing windows, quiet smiles. But when night falls, the silence becomes too perfect. In these towns, people don't ask questions. They lock their doors early, and they don't talk about what happens after dark. Tonight, we're uncovering 10 true Quebec small-town horror stories. Real encounters from places buried in snow and secrets. A neighbor who waved every morning until his house was found frozen from the inside. A village road that disappears every winter. And a bell that rings from an abandoned church, even though no one's been inside for years. These aren't folklore. These are stories told in whispers, because everyone knows someone who didn't make it home. Before we step into the cold together, tell me, where are you watching from right now? And what time is it where you are? Because in Quebec, the night lasts longer than you think. If you're brave enough to face the quiet, hit like, subscribe, and comment below. I felt the cold. Now, turn the lights down, listen to the wind outside your window, and whatever you do, don't answer the knock you hear in the snow. This is 10 Untold Most Disturbing True Quebec Small-Town Horror Stories. Let's begin. I always believed small towns had their own way of hiding things, like they wrapped their secrets behind the quiet streets and old brick walls that everyone walked past without noticing. I grew up in a tiny place on the outskirts of Montreal, way out near the fields, where the forests pressed up against the edge of the town like they were waiting for someone to wander too close. I never really thought much about danger when I was younger. I just tried to stay away from home as long as I could. Being the youngest kid meant being the one everyone picked on, and the only way to avoid my brothers was to leave before they woke up and return after the sun dipped behind the old silos. Most mornings in the summer, I rolled out of bed before sunrise, swallowed whatever cereal I could find as fast as my hands would move, jumped on my bike, and disappeared until late at night. I was around the age where I had enough freedom to roam everywhere, but not enough sense to stay away from places that felt wrong. That year, I had decided to spend the morning fishing with a friend. I didn't even enjoy fishing, but any excuse to escape the house early was good enough for me. The quickest way to his place was a cracked driveway that cut through this abandoned property everyone in town whispered about. They called it the Maison des Lumières, but no one alive had ever seen it lit. It had been closed for as long as I could remember. A set of iron gates hung over the entrance like giant black teeth, and the stone path ran straight toward the front of a huge building surrounded by empty fields. Even though the place looked well built, something about it made the back of my neck crawl. Every time I passed by, I felt like someone stood behind one of those dusty windows watching me. My friend and I spent that morning trying to catch anything at all, even though the river was brown and thick and full of garbage. After a couple hours, neither of us cared anymore, so we packed our stuff and rode back through the old property, my stomach tight as we passed the building again. The fear never got easier, no matter how many times I went through. When we reached my house, we tossed our fishing gear in the garage, chugged cold soda, grabbed a basketball wedged on a shelf, and headed toward the park. We spent a while playing with older teens who were way better than us. My friend eventually left since he didn't enjoy the game much, but I stayed until most of the guys drifted home. I stood there trying to figure out what to do next when an older kid named Mark started talking to me. He wasn't someone I knew well, just someone I saw around. He was awkward and tall, always missing every shot he took. He asked if I wanted to ride around with him, and because I had nothing better to do, I agreed. He took me down near the river again and pointed out a tiny washed-out path that crossed over to a small island. I'd never known it existed, and for a moment I forgot how weird he seemed. But then, he led me to a run-down porch a few blocks away, where an even older guy sat in the shade, staring off like he hadn't slept in years. His name was Rene. A rough-looking man with gray creeping through his hair and a quiet stare that made me uneasy. The two of them talked in low voices inside the house while I sat outside alone, my nerves twisting tighter with every minute that passed. I kept trying to hear what they were saying, but I only caught muffled sounds, like there was a third person inside speaking with them too. When they finally came outside, they told me we were all going for a ride, and for some reason, I followed. I didn't like it, but I didn't know how to say no. As we rode through downtown, they bought me candy and a drink, which only made things feel stranger. The sun was slipping lower in the sky, so I said I had to get home. Renee told me we just had one more place to go. I remember the cold feeling spreading in my chest when I saw that we were heading toward the abandoned Maison de Lumière. I wanted to turn around, but they boxed me in with their bikes until we reached the front steps. I forced myself to act calm even though my heart was pounding. Renee hopped off his bike and said something about how he always wanted to see inside. Mark stood behind me like he didn't want me leaving. They pushed their bikes to the side and walked up the stairs. I stayed at the bottom, straddling my bike, hoping they would give up and leave. They tugged at the front door, but it was locked. When they tried one of the side French-style doors, it wouldn't budge, but when they tried the opposite one, it swung open. They waved at me to come up, but I just shook my head. They came down the steps telling me I needed to go inside with them. I said I needed to go home and turned to grab my bike. That was when Renee grabbed my arm hard, his fingers digging into my skin. Mark stepped forward too, his face blank like he wasn't even thinking. I tried to pull away, but Mark seized my other arm and they lifted me enough to throw off my balance. I screamed for help that no one would hear. Mark crouched to grab my legs, but I kicked forward and smashed my foot into his nose. He shrieked and stumbled backward, blood dripping down his face. I twisted and slammed my head backward into Renee's chin. My arm slipped free for a second, and I ripped myself loose, kicking him as hard as I could. He dropped to one knee, and Mark lunged again. I grabbed my basketball from where it sat in my bike frame and hurled it at him. It hit his hand and made him flinch. I didn't wait. I leapt on my bike and pedaled as fast as my legs could move. I didn't look back once. The second I reached my house, I darted into the garage where my dad stood behind his workbench. He looked up for only a moment before returning to his saw. I tried to breathe normally while watching the driveway for any sign of the two men. They never came. I went inside and sat on my bed shaking until everything blurred. I didn't tell anyone. I couldn't. I felt stupid, scared, confused, and embarrassed all at once, so I locked it deep in my mind like nothing happened. Years passed. I barely thought about it. When I was close to finishing high school, I had to write a paper about the history of my town. I decided to dig into the past of the Maison de Lumière. At the time, someone had bought the land and started building condos and a golf course. The news had been full of articles about the project. While reading through old files, I found something buried about a year after my encounter. A newspaper story that made my stomach turn. 3 men had been arrested for hiding in that same building. Their photos were printed right there: Mark, Renee, and a third man I had never seen. They had kidnapped a mentally handicapped teen from the local hospital and kept him inside the abandoned property. I felt sick. My hands shook as I stared at the screen. The third man in the photo looked like the shape I had heard inside the house that afternoon. The article explained they had been living in the building for months, maybe longer. It didn't explain what they were planning with the boy they took. It didn't say what happened inside those walls, but all I could think was that if I had walked up those steps with them, if I had gone inside that open French door, I never would have walked back out. The past didn't stay quiet for long after that. When I finally moved out and found a small apartment closer to Montreal, I thought I had left all of that behind. But weird things started happening in the place I rented. The first strange thing was the mailbox. I kept receiving envelopes addressed to the former tenant, and at first it didn't bother me. But then I noticed the dates on the letters were from weeks after he had disappeared. People said he had moved to another town, but why would his mail still be arriving weeks after? And why would half the letters look like bills, but the other half be blank envelopes with no return address? Sometimes at night I heard footsteps outside my door, but when I checked the hallway, no one was there. A neighbor told me the previous renter had left suddenly, without warning. She said the police were asking questions but never came back. I tried not to think about it, but every time another envelope arrived with the same man's name written in shaky handwriting, my stomach dropped. Then another strange thing happened while I was working part-time as a delivery driver. A few times I got sent to deliver food to an apartment listed as active in the system. When I got there, the entire unit was sealed with police tape, the door boarded up. The resident had been taken away months earlier after some incident no one would talk about, but somehow the orders kept coming from that same address. When I reported it to the app, they said the orders came from a verified device and they didn't see any issue on their end. The weirdest part was the metro. One night around 2:17 a.m., me and a coworker were sorting delivery bags, and he showed me a clip from a CCTV feed that leaked online. A camera deep inside an old station that had been closed for decades showed figures walking down the platform, disappearing into dark tunnels. No scheduled trains, no workers, nothing. Just people walking into darkness as if someone had called them there. I never wanted to admit it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was connected somehow. Like something had followed me from that abandoned building all those years ago, something that didn't need names or faces to keep watching. The more time passed, the more I noticed. Shadows at the end of the hallway that were too tall to be a person. Mail arriving at my door even when I stopped checking the mailbox. Whispering sounds near the vents. Banging from the unit above me even though no one had lived there since the previous tenant vanished. Sometimes I saw movement behind my shower curtain even when the bathroom door was locked. Little things, but enough to make sleep harder every week. One night around 7:45 p.m., I heard a soft tapping on my front door. Then a second tap. Then nothing. When I checked the peephole, the hallway was dark. The lights flickered, then shut off. A small envelope slid under the crack. When I opened it, inside was a single folded page torn from a notebook. No handwriting, just a dirty fingerprint smeared across it. I threw it out and tried to convince myself I was imagining things. But the next morning I woke to find every envelope I had thrown away stacked neatly on my kitchen table, arranged in rows like someone wanted me to see them. I checked every door and window. Nothing was broken. Nothing was disturbed, except my table. A few weeks later, I was riding my bike home after a shift. The sky was gray, the streets quiet. I felt uneasy and kept glancing behind me as I rode through the empty neighborhood toward my building. When I reached the courtyard, I froze. Standing by the entrance was a figure, tall and thin, wearing old clothes like he had been dragged out of time. His hair hung in messy strands. He didn't move, didn't blink. He just stared at me like he knew me, like he had always known me. I thought maybe it was someone from the building, but when I blinked, he was gone. No footsteps, no sound, nothing. Only empty air. Later that night, I dreamed of the Maison des Lumières. The French doors creaked open, and the inside glowed with a soft, pale light I had never seen before. Figures walked through the hallways, their shapes long and twisted, their hands dragging along the walls. One of them turned toward me, and the face looked like Mark's but older, stretched thin and pale as if he had never left that building. He raised his hand toward me, and behind him I saw the shadow of the third man, the one I had never seen clearly. He stepped forward, the floorboards bending under his weight, and whispered my name even though he didn't have a mouth. I woke up gasping. My window was open even though I knew I had locked it before bed. Cold air drifted into my room, and on the floor by my bed was one of the envelopes that had come for the previous tenant. At that moment, something clicked, something terrible. I remembered the face of the third man in the old newspaper, the stranger whose voice I had heard from behind the screen door years ago. I realized he had never stared directly at the camera. His eyes were always slightly turned as if he had been looking past the photographer, past the police, past everyone, directly at me. I tried to convince myself it was coincidence, that I was making connections where there were none. But deep down I knew something was wrong with that building and with the men who hid inside it, and whatever darkness lived there didn't stop when the police took them away. It spread. It followed the missing boy. It followed the previous tenant, and now it was following me. Some nights I still hear tapping at my door. Some nights I hear footsteps in the hallway. Sometimes mail arrives with no name written on it at all, and when I ride through the city near sunset, I swear I see that same tall figure standing near the old metro entrances, watching me from the shadows. The worst part is, I can never be sure if I am awake or dreaming because the feeling is always the same cold breath on the back of my neck. The same invisible eyes staring from places people aren't supposed to be. The same whisper in the dark reminding me of the abandoned building I fled from as a kid, the building with the open door I never walked through. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if they had dragged me inside. Sometimes I think maybe I did go inside and never came out. Maybe the version of me who ran away was never really me at all. I always believed quiet places kept dark things hidden, and I learned that truth the year I moved with my mother to a lonely house on the far edge of Quebec City, where the suburbs faded into old farmland and tall forests that swallowed the last streetlight. I was younger then, tired from long work hours and late college classes, stretched thin between life and survival, never imagining that something as simple as a walk down the road could twist my fate into something cold and unforgettable. Our home was a single-floor house with wide windows facing a large, empty field, a field that looked harmless during the day but turned into a black ocean at night. Past that field was a silent highway where cars passed like ghosts. On one side of us, half a mile down, lived a strange farmer known for talking to scarecrows and wandering the woods at night with a lantern. On the other side, about a mile away, sat a broken house with shattered windows and burned siding, a house people whispered about, saying trouble lived there even if no one officially did. Everyone called it the fog house because mist clung to that property even when the rest of the road was dry. People truly did go in and out, but they were quiet and avoided neighbors. The isolation made everything echo, even simple sounds like wind under the porch or a branch shifting against the siding. The darkness was heavier than any I had known before, spreading early in the evening and swallowing the fields, leaving only the porch light to protect us. I never thought much about it. I was too busy rushing between school and work, too exhausted to fear shadows. One night changed that. It was after a long class that ended late, sometime around 9-something p.m., and the sky was already deep and starless. I remember yawning as I drove, my car humming along the empty road, the cold air pressing against the windows. I reached the stretch near our house where the road cut between fields, and that was when I saw him. A man walked along the right side of the pavement, heading the same direction I was. He wore a bright mustard yellow shirt and loose gray track pants, clothes that clashed with the freezing night. It struck me how out of place he looked. People did walk this road sometimes, mostly those from the fog house, but I always checked my mirrors out of habit. When I glanced toward him as I passed, he turned toward me. He smiled and waved in a slow, almost floaty way, as if I knew him. Something about that smile made my stomach tighten. It felt too quick, too ready. I pressed the gas harder. Our driveway appeared ahead like a thin cut in the dark, and I pulled in fast, gravel snapping under the tires. The porch light flicked on from its motion sensor, giving a dusty glow to the front yard. I sat for a moment in the car, breathing slowly, telling myself it was nothing, just a stranger who liked waving at cars. But the unease clung to me like cold water. I stepped out, hurried up the porch, and entered the house, locking the door behind me. I checked every lock in the place, from the windows to the back door. My mother was already asleep in her room, the hallway quiet except for her small fan humming. I sat on the couch, staring at the doorway, waiting to see the man walk past the house like any normal person would. He didn't. Two figures stepped into the glow of our porch light instead. My heartbeat kicked hard. There were two men, the one in the yellow shirt and another wearing dark jeans and a black hoodie. They didn't walk by. They walked straight into our driveway. Then they split apart, one moving toward my car, the other lingering near the edge of the yard. I watched frozen as the man in the yellow shirt tugged at my car door handle, testing it quietly. The one in the dark hoodie stepped back and scanned the house, like he was checking for movement. In my rush, I had left my phone inside the car, and panic hit me like a blow to the ribs. I wondered if the phone was what he wanted. Then yellow shirt guy turned toward the house and started walking to the front door. Fear jolted through me. I rushed to my mother's room and shook her awake. She blinked up at me with blurry eyes as I stammered through the situation. Before she could fully understand, we both heard it, the slow turn of the doorknob from outside, metal clicking softly like fingertips tapping glass. My mother stood up, calm but sharp, and went to the door. The porch light kept everything outside visible. I knelt on the couch to get a better view through the window. The man in the yellow shirt stood on the porch, and the hooded one remained in the driveway watching him. My mother spoke through the door in a steady voice, saying she had nothing for them. The man outside said he found a wallet, and my mother answered that her wallet was in the house, so he should leave since it was late. Something in his voice shifted, and he said slowly that he wasn't a bad person, that we didn't need to worry. Those words didn't comfort me. They froze me. He tried the doorknob again. My mother told me to call the police. I whispered fast that my phone was in the car. She walked to the kitchen to grab her own from the charger and handed it to me, then went toward the bathroom window that faced the backyard. While I was talking to the emergency operator, explaining everything, my mother returned quickly with her gun, a small metal thing she kept locked away but remembered exactly where. She wasn't shaking. She wasn't scared. She was angry. She said someone was in our backyard too. The operator asked me to stay on the line, but everything felt too loud in my ears. My mother stepped toward the door again, her voice raised now. She said if the man touched the handle one more time, she would open the door and shoot him. Her voice carried through the porch like a blade. The two men bolted instantly, running down the road toward the fog house. My mother hurried to the bathroom, where the figure in the backyard had apparently been crouching in the dark. He saw his friends run and took off after them, disappearing into the blackness. Police arrived and searched the yard, shining their lights into the grass and along the field. They went to the fog house and found a group of men gathered around the broken porch. One wore the mustard yellow shirt. They were arrested for trespassing and attempted break-in, but to my knowledge, nothing worse stuck. After that night, the road was quiet again, but the quiet didn't feel the same. The strange part was later, when the police asked us about something odd they found in the fog house. One of the officers asked my mother if anyone in the house worked night security somewhere because they found an old logbook with restricted access entries, and my name was written in it on a recent date even though I had never seen that place before. The officer assumed someone wrote it to mess with us, but something about it didn't sit right with me. A few days later, I visited a small museum in town for a college assignment. While the guide showed us old photos of Quebec City through the decades, I noticed something behind her shoulder. In a picture taken many years before I was alive, a boy stood near an old monument, and he looked disturbingly like one of the men from that night. Same narrow face, same eyes, same strange smile. I didn't say anything. I didn't ask. I just stared. The night guard at my workplace said something odd too. He told me that, on his desk, in the overnight log, someone wrote my name again on a restricted page, even though I had never signed anything and had not even been scheduled to work that night. He said he thought it was a prank, but his voice held a nervous tremble. He also said he saw someone who looked like me walking in the parking lot well past midnight when I wasn't even there. Everything felt like it was inching toward me, like a slow shadow, trying to catch up. Time kept passing, but fear stayed close. I started checking every door twice, then 3 times, until my mother joked that I was becoming more paranoid than her. But it didn't feel like paranoia. It felt like something left unfinished in the dark had followed me home that night, something that didn't care about arrests or closed cases. One evening months later, I walked down the hallway after brushing my teeth. It was late, maybe around 1-something in the morning. The house was quiet, lights dim, the front window showing only blackness from outside. I walked by the entrance and froze. The porch light flicked on. Movement. I peered out slowly, heartbeat thudding. At first I saw nothing. Then a figure stepped into the glow, just barely within the circle of light. It was someone in a dark hoodie, head lowered, hands loose at their sides. They lifted their face. The same smile. The same eyes. Not the same person. The face was mine, not a reflection. Not glass. It stood outside, watching, waiting. I stumbled back. My mother woke at the sound of my gasp and came running. When we both returned to the window, the porch light was still on, but no one stood there. Nothing moved outside. The yard was empty. I barely slept that night. Weeks later, after trying to push the memory away, I took a bus tour with classmates for a photography project. The tour guide walked us through narrow streets, showing old photos from decades ago. I wasn't paying much attention until she paused near a fountain. She held up a picture of the same spot from the past, pointing out the people who once lived nearby. In the photograph, partly hidden among the crowd, was someone with my exact face. Not similar. Not close. Exact. The guide continued her talk, unaware of my shock. My hands went cold, my breath shallow. I wanted to ask how old the picture was, but something in me whispered that I shouldn't. When I got home that evening, the house was dark. My mother had gone to visit a friend. I stepped onto the porch, the wooden boards creaking softly. As I unlocked the door, I saw something sitting on the welcome mat, a small object, worn and cracked. My wallet, the same wallet that had been in my purse all day. I picked it up slowly. It was old, scratched, and covered in a thin layer of dust, like it had been left somewhere for a very long time. I opened it. Inside was a photograph I had never seen before. It was me, but younger, wearing that same mustard yellow shirt from the man I had seen on the road months ago. In the photo, I stood near the fog house, staring at the camera with that same strange smile. My hands shook uncontrollably. I closed the wallet and stepped inside the house with trembling breath. The rooms were quiet. Too quiet. Too quiet. In the living room, the TV flickered on by itself, glowing with static. The sound was low, like whispers blending with air. I stood there, frozen, then the screen changed. For a moment, I saw a grainy image of our house, our porch, our driveway. The angle was from outside, as if someone was watching right then. A figure stood in the driveway, still and shadowed. The screen clicked off, leaving silence heavy behind it. That night I heard footsteps in the backyard, soft and slow. I didn't look. I didn't open any curtains. I just sat on my bed with my back to the window, listening to the steady pace of something walking through grass, circling the house like it knew exactly where my room was. By dawn, the footsteps stopped. Life went on for others, but not for me. Every time I walked outside, I felt watched. Every time I heard a creak at night, I froze. And every time the porch light flicked on, I felt a pull in my chest, like someone was calling me by stepping out of the dark. One winter morning, the police knocked on our door again. They asked if we had seen the strange farmer lately. People said he had vanished. His lantern was found hanging on a fence post facing our field, still warm, like he had just put it there before disappearing into thin air. That night, I dreamed of the field behind our house. I dreamed of 3 men standing there, the yellow shirt, the hooded one, and the third shadowy one from the backyard. But their faces kept shifting into mine, over and over, like mirrors melting into each other. When I woke, my room was freezing cold, colder than any winter morning should be. For days, I avoided the window. I avoided the porch light, but the fear never left. Instead, it grew, crawling into the edges of my life. The city felt smaller. The shadows felt closer. Every night, just before sleep, I heard the soft sound of a doorknob turning, slow and careful, as if someone was testing it, wondering if tonight was the night it would finally open. I don't know how long this will continue. I don't know what the men wanted or why my face keeps showing up in places it doesn't belong. I just know something followed me that night, something patient, something that wears faces like clothing. Sometimes, I think it waits outside even now. Sometimes, I think it waits inside. I remember the moment my life split in two, the moment before I knew real fear and the moment after it took over everything. I grew up in Laval, a quiet place that used to feel like the world was wrapped in a soft blanket. Back then, families stayed in the same streets for decades. Doors were rarely locked, and people waved from porches as if danger did not exist. My grandfather, a stubborn man named Victor, owned a small grocery market on the corner of Gagnon Street. Everyone went there, not just for food but for company, and he treated every customer like they were part of the family. My mother, whose name was Clara, started helping him when she was barely a teenager. She knew every neighbor, every habit, every smile, and every story that walked through the front door. She also knew immediately when someone did not belong. She used to tell me that the first warning of danger is when your body reacts before your mind understands why. That was the way she felt on the day two strangers walked in. She had never seen them before, and in a town as small as ours back then, that meant something. She had a gift for memory, and she trusted it. One man looked older, maybe in his late 50s or early 60s, with stiff shoulders that did not move when he walked. His eyes darted around the aisles like he was searching for a hidden exit. The second man stayed close behind him, younger by at least 30 years, quiet in a way that felt unnatural. He moved with his head slightly bent like he was listening for something no one else could hear. My mother stepped forward because that was her job. She welcomed them and asked if they needed help. The older man gave a slow grin, a grin that she said felt like a cold hand pressed to her back. He told her they would ask if they needed something. Then he walked away with the younger man shadowing him. They came back the next day and the next and every day for almost a week. Each time, the older one asked her more questions. He wanted to know where she lived, what time she got off work, why she always wore the same braided bracelet around her wrist. She gave him vague answers, trying to stay polite because she had been raised to be respectful. But inside, she said she felt the air tighten around her. The younger one stayed silent the entire time. He never spoke, not even to say thank you. He simply stared past her shoulder like he was watching something float behind her, something only he could see. The last day they came in was the day everything changed. The older man told her he needed help with camping supplies. He said they were planning a trip and needed strong rope, heavy duct tape, and a few things for outdoor safety. He mentioned liking to shoot guns and said he wrapped tape around his hands for a better grip. My mother nodded and helped them find everything, but her chest felt like someone was squeezing it. She felt wrong, as if she were guiding wolves to the perfect tools for hunting. They paid and left. For the first time in her life, she memorized a license plate. She did not know why. She just felt she had to. A few days later, a cashier from a shop down the street disappeared. At first, people whispered that she had run away with someone, but by the end of the week, the truth came out. Her body was found near the riverbank, bound tightly with rope and duct tape, her arms bruised, her face pale from hours of pain. My mother froze the moment she read the details. She felt as if cold water had poured into her lungs. She ran to my grandfather with the newspaper in her shaking hands. She told him she knew who did it. She knew it was the men from the store. My grandfather tried to calm her down because he did not want to believe evil was walking through his market. But she would not stop shaking, would not stop insisting. He finally drove her to the police station. She gave every detail, even the license plate she had forced herself to memorize. The detective listened carefully, taking notes, leaning forward in his chair every time she described their strange behaviors. The police caught the men a week later. But what the detective told my mother afterward shattered her sense of safety. Those men had been watching my grandfather's store. They had been casing it, waiting for a moment she was alone, looking for someone who fit a pattern only they understood. They chose the other cashier only because she closed that night and my mother did not. My mother never worked alone again, but that is only the past. What happened to me years later is something even worse, something that made me understand that horror does not stay dead. It moves, it listens, and sometimes it comes back for the bloodline it missed. By the time I was grown, I drove rideshare cars through Laval to pay my bills. The nights were quiet most of the time, but some rides left shadows that followed me home. I picked up a woman one foggy night around 2:12 a.m., and she climbed into the back without looking at me. Her hair covered her face, and her hands sat limp in her lap. I asked where she was going, and instead of answering through her mouth, her lips never moved. Yet I heard a voice whisper the address inside my head, like someone breathing behind my ear. I froze, gripping the steering wheel so hard my fingers numbed. Each time we reached a stop sign, she gave wordless directions, no lips moving, no breath, only a cold presence sitting behind me. When she stepped out of the car, she left the door wide open. I turned to close it, and she was already gone, swallowed by the fog. That same month, my family kept hearing footsteps in our garage. We installed motion alarms thinking maybe raccoons were getting in. But the alarms went off at random hours, sometimes at 3:18 a.m., sometimes at 11:47 p.m., always followed by slow, heavy steps like someone pacing. Every time we checked, the garage was empty, but the air felt wrong, too thick, too heavy, carrying the scent of damp rope. Then the thing with the receipts happened. I worked part-time at a small market, much like the one my grandfather owned. Customers came and went all day, but one night, a customer handed me a crumpled receipt from months ago. The name on it belonged to a man who had gone missing, someone the police still searched for. And another evening I found receipts on the counter with names of people who had been dead for weeks. I did not see who put them there. They simply appeared, bent at the edges, damp like something touched them with cold hands. At first I tried to tell myself it was strange, maybe even supernatural, but harmless. But I was lying to myself. The danger became real on a night that still burns inside my memory. I was closing the market alone for the first time in a long time. It was 7:45 p.m. and the sun had already slipped behind the roof lines. I locked the front door and turned off the lights when I saw movement in the parking lot. Two men stood near the streetlight, half hidden by darkness. One older, taller, shoulders stiff. Another younger, head lowered like he was listening for something unseen. My breath caught. The description matched what my mother had told me all my life, but that was impossible. The original men had been caught. They were in prison. Yet these two looked like shadows cut from the same shape. The older man lifted his head. His eyes met mine through the window. A slow grin stretched across his face, a grin so familiar it made my stomach flip. He raised his hand and pointed at me through the glass, his finger steady, like he was choosing me. I backed away, trembling, locking the door again and again, even though it was already locked. The younger man stepped forward, his head still tilted like he was listening. Then he placed something on the ground. A receipt, folded with sharp creases. I did not wait to see more. I grabbed my things and ran through the back exit. I drove as fast as I could, trying to convince myself it was coincidence, a trick of fear, maybe two men who looked similar. But my heart knew better. 2 nights later, someone knocked on my window at 3:11 a.m. A soft, dragging knock that made my skin crawl. When I pulled the curtain back, nobody was there. But resting on the windowsill was another receipt. This one smelled like damp forest soil. I could not sleep. I could not think. My mother's story replayed in my head again and again. The killers had watched her before choosing their victim. The killers had used rope. The killers had used duct tape. The killers had frightened her for days before acting. Now they were doing the same to me. I called the police, but they found nothing. No fingerprints. No shoe prints. No sign anyone had been there at all. They told me maybe neighborhood teens were playing tricks, but I knew the truth. Something had returned, something tied to my family, something that had waited through the years, something that wanted to finish what it started. The nights grew worse. The footsteps in the garage became louder, almost angry, pacing back and forth. My rideshare app began glitching, showing pickup requests from names of missing people who had never been found. Each time the request popped up, the temperature inside my car dropped. One night, the same silent woman from before appeared as a ride request. I felt her cold voice again, even though she never spoke through her mouth. I canceled the ride and threw my phone onto the seat, shaking. But the worst night came when I heard the back door creak. It was 2:17 a.m. I woke up to the sound of heavy breathing, slow and deep, like a person with large lungs standing just outside my bedroom doorway. I lay still, heart thundering, afraid to even blink. The air smelled like duct tape and wet rope. I reached for my phone with trembling fingers, but before I could call anyone, I heard the front door slam. Footsteps raced across the porch, and then silence swallowed everything. When I ran outside, the street was empty except for a piece of rope lying on my welcome mat. I knew then that this was only the beginning. The next day, I went to my grandfather's old market, the place where everything had first started years ago. It was abandoned now, with boarded windows and dust covering the counters. I walked inside through the back, ignoring the broken lock, and breathed in the scent of stale air. The silence felt alive. On the central counter lay a folded piece of paper. I hesitated before opening it, but curiosity pulled me in like a hand around my wrist. Inside was a list of names. My mother's name was at the top. My name was underneath. The next line was blank, waiting to be filled. The store suddenly groaned from the back room, wood shifting, footsteps scraping against the floor. I felt the temperature drop, as if someone invisible stood only inches from my neck. The same cold, whispering voice that had directed me in the rideshare car brushed my ear, telling me I should not have come here alone. I ran, stumbling out the back door, almost tripping on the cracked pavement. I did not stop until I reached my car. When I looked back, I saw two silhouettes standing in the dark store window, their bodies still, their heads tilted toward me. I drove away without looking again. But the story does not end safely. The receipts keep appearing, the alarms keep going off. Sometimes, when I pass a mirror at night, I see a second reflection behind me, its grin slow and patient. The men my mother saw were caught, yes. But something darker than them survived. Maybe they were part of something larger. Maybe they were servants of something old. Or maybe evil moves like a disease, finding new hosts every generation. Whatever they are watching, and they are not finished with me. I remember the night everything in Gatineau shifted from normal to something I still cannot understand, and I wish I could say time has helped me forget, but it has only sharpened every sound and shadow the way cold air sharpens breath. I had returned to my parents' place for the summer, a quiet break I thought would settle my nerves after years away in the city. Gatineau had always been a small town tucked into forests, soft hills, and long trails that stretched deeper than anyone cared to explore after dark. Most people called it peaceful, but I always felt the kind of stillness that hides behind a door slightly open, like the silence was holding its breath. I was 23 and working a small evening job at a shipping warehouse on the edge of town. It wasn't my dream, but it covered gas and late-night takeout, and that felt like enough. My name is Joran, and the only thing leaving me uneasy back then was the loneliness of being back in a place I had tried so hard to outgrow. The town was quiet, the neighbors predictable, the houses lined like repeated wallpaper patterns, and the trails behind the neighborhood curled through old trees the way veins twist under skin. That summer, the community hosted a local event called Echo at the Park, something they held every year in different corners of the neighborhood. There was always a band, always fading covers of old rock songs, always clusters of families sitting on blankets, and always the sense that the forest around the park was watching. This year, it was held at Riviere Park, close enough for me to walk. My parents were out for the night at a restaurant in downtown Hull, and I didn't want to stay alone in the empty house, so I poured a little vodka into a soda bottle, told myself it would steady my nerves, and stepped outside into the summer air. The walk to the park took only a few minutes. The air smelled like freshly cut grass, and the faint music carried through the trees like someone humming behind a wall. I had finished nearly half the drink by the time I reached the benches near the stage, and I felt warm, foggy, and careless in a way that made everything seem softer than it should have been. I took a seat on the far side of a long wooden bench near the stage. There was someone already sitting on the opposite edge, a man with a lean face, grayish stubble, and eyes too sharp for the gentle music playing. I didn't pay attention at first, but I sensed the stillness of someone watching out of the corner of their eye. I kept my distance, focusing on the lights, the music, the people wandering around. My phone felt like a shield in my hands, something to look at so I wouldn't need to talk. The man, however, had different plans. He greeted me with a soft hello and asked how I was doing. I answered politely, hoping he would stop there, but he didn't. He asked if I was enjoying the night, and I stupidly said yes, letting the buzz of alcohol guide my tongue instead of my brain. He asked where I lived, and I gave a vague answer because the sudden shine in his eyes made me uneasy. I thought he was just making conversation, but when he shifted on the bench, sliding closer by a few inches, something in my chest tightened. I shook my bottle lightly and the last bit of soda fizzed, and his eyes followed the sound with an interest that didn't feel right. I tried to pull away without being obvious. I used the excuse of needing a break from the noise and stepped away toward the playground near the center of the park. The playground had tall climbing walls, tunnels, and large metal swings that creaked whenever the wind changed direction. I slipped behind one of the tall structures, out of his line of sight. I pulled out my phone and messaged a few of my friends, telling them something wasn't right, that a man was following me with questions I didn't want to answer. Most of them were far away or busy, but one friend named Sorrel said she was in town visiting family and could come get me if I waited about 10 minutes. 10 minutes felt like a lifetime in that place. I sat near the swings, pretending to relax, pretending nothing inside me was screaming. Then I saw him again, the man from the bench moving toward me with steady steps, as if he had known exactly where I would be. He sat on the swing beside me with a heavy thud and leaned in just enough to make the distance feel unsafe. His voice slid into the air with quiet pressure, asking what I needed to know about him, asking why I walked away. I told him I was tired and thinking about going home soon. His expression changed, tightening around the corners as if he didn't like that answer. He asked where I lived again, this time not with curiosity but with expectation, like he had already decided to follow me home and was waiting for a direction. When I refused to tell him and pointed in the wrong direction instead, he stood and stepped toward the shadows between the trees, gesturing as if I should follow. I froze. I didn't move. He stared at me like I was failing a test I didn't sign up for. I told him I wasn't ready to leave yet. He didn't go far. He stayed near, pacing slowly, watching me from angles he thought I couldn't see. The minutes crawled by until the bright headlights of Sorrel's small car rolled near the park entrance. Relief almost knocked me over. I stood quickly, saying that was my friend. The man followed behind me before I could reach her, his steps too close, his presence pressing against the back of my neck. When I reached Sorrel, he touched my shoulder, cold fingers that made my entire body jolt. He claimed I had promised my number. I had never made such a promise, but panic made me act. I gave him a number, a fake one, anything to end the moment. He began dialing it immediately, staring at my phone like a predator watching for movement. Sorrel spoke fast, reminding me my phone had died, and I nodded quickly. We made our escape, stepping toward her car with forced calm. He didn't follow, but he watched as we drove away, eyes fixed on us like he was memorizing the car, the direction, the way back. Sorrel drove in loops and took long turns until we were far from my street. She asked what had happened, and I tried to explain, but the words didn't match the fear crawling under my skin. I stayed at her family's place until almost midnight, waiting for my parents to return home so I wouldn't enter the empty house alone. When I finally stepped out onto my street, everything felt off. The houses looked normal, the windows glowing softly, the lawns trimmed, but the street lights flickered like they were whispering warnings. I walked quickly, keeping my phone in my pocket even though it had battery again. The night air felt thick, like the dark was paying attention. When I reached my parents' driveway, something on the front porch made my breath catch. A pair of running shoes, old and dirty, placed neatly side by side like someone had left them as an offering. They were not ours. None of us owned worn-out shoes like that. I stepped back, heart pounding. A jogger in town had been talking online about finding the same pair of shoes placed neatly along different trails every morning, always in a new spot, always arranged like someone carefully positioned them. Everyone thought it was a prank. But now, seeing them on my porch, perfectly lined up, the laces tucked in with strange precision, made the air turn sharp. I didn't touch them. I hurried inside and locked the door. That night, the house felt alive with the settling groans of wood and shifting shadows. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw the man stare. When I finally drifted off, I woke again around 2:17 a.m. to a faint sound, something like whispering through a wall. The guest room next to mine was empty, but the whispers seemed to seep through from the other side, soft and breathy, like someone standing close with their mouth near a crack in the plaster. I leaned closer to the wall, and the whispering stopped instantly. I didn't sleep again. The next morning, I decided to clear my head by taking a walk along one of the forest trails. It was early, the sun barely rising. As I stepped onto the dirt path, I saw them again. The same shoes from my porch, placed neatly in the middle of the trail, the same careful arrangement, the same unnatural tidiness that made it seem like someone had knelt down and adjusted the angle until it was perfect. My chest tightened. I turned around and went home. For the next few days, strange things continued. My phone would buzz at random with unknown numbers that ended the call the moment I picked up. At night, I'd hear whispering through the wall again, sometimes laughter so faint I wondered if the house remembered something I didn't. One night, after my warehouse shift, I boarded a late bus heading back toward my neighborhood. The bus was nearly empty, only an old woman near the front and a man sitting at the very back, his face turned away. At the first stop, the woman stepped off. I glanced back at the man, but he didn't move. At the next stop, no one joined and no one left. The bus driver kept looking in the mirror with uneasy eyes, and I could tell something was wrong. When the third stop arrived, I noticed the man had vanished, leaving the seat empty, not enough time to stand, walk, and exit without being seen. The bus doors hadn't opened. The driver's hands shook on the wheel. He whispered that this wasn't the first time. By then, everything inside me felt like thin glass. Later that week, it all came to a head. I was alone at the house again around 7:45 p.m. waiting for my parents. I heard movement outside, saw footsteps on gravel. I turned off the lights and peeked out through the blinds. Someone stood at the end of the driveway, a tall figure in the dim light, not moving, just watching the house. The fear that washed over me felt like drowning. When I stepped back from the window, the whispering returned, this time from inside the living room, faint but real. It sounded like two voices overlapping, one deep, one thin, both speaking too softly to understand. I didn't know whether to run outside or stay inside. Both choices felt like traps. I locked myself in the hallway bathroom and sat on the floor breathing fast. The house creaked, the whispers swelled, then faded, and footsteps brushed against the hall as if someone dragged their feet lightly, testing each board. Hours passed like that, or maybe minutes. Time didn't feel real. When my parents finally returned and their car headlights washed across the walls, everything stopped. The whispering, the footsteps, the pressure in the air, all gone like a curtain dropping. I didn't tell them everything. I just said someone had been outside. They promised to check, but when they stepped back out with flashlights, the driveway was empty. No footprints, no signs of anyone standing there. No proof except my shaking hands, but I know what I saw. And I know nothing has followed me since I left Gatineau. But sometimes, when I wake up at night, I still hear faint whispering in the walls like something learned my name that night and is still saying it, waiting for me to listen. I always believed that some places remember what people try to forget, and I learned this truth the year I worked as a night lookout in the small Quebec town of Longueuil. I was young back then, barely 20, proud of my new uniform and certain nothing in the quiet north could ever scare me. I was wrong, and I still feel my heartbeat change when I think back to those months alone on the tower, staring over miles of dark treetops that move like breathing shadows. My name is Marcel, and the story I'm about to tell begins on a cold evening when the sky looked bruised and the wind had that strange stillness that feels like the world is holding its breath. Longueuil was peaceful during the day, but the forest that bordered it had a different voice at night. People called it the Old Stretch, a place where stories grew like the tall trees. Some talked about hunters who vanished, others whispered about strange figures seen near abandoned cabins, but no one said these things loudly. I got the job as a night lookout because the department wanted someone young, someone willing to stay in a tower alone for long hours, someone who did not scare easily. They offered 1 week on, 1 week off, in a small cabin built under the main tower platform, with a stove, a bed, and a little radio. I thought it sounded perfect, quiet work for decent pay. I took the job to help my family, but also because I wanted time to think. I grew up in a working family on the south side of Quebec, and I had plans. I was engaged to a girl back home, and I spent many nights writing her letters from the tower. Life felt steady, almost peaceful, until the night everything changed. My routine was simple. I climbed the tall stairs, stepped onto the platform, and used my binoculars to scan for illegal fires or trespassers. The department warned me about poaching because it had become a problem around Longueuil. People set traps deep in the forest to catch animals illegally, and the law took it seriously. The old stories about creatures in the woods kept most people away, but not everyone. I had only one partner on the job, an older man named Renard. He worked the tower nearly 5 kilometers away. He had the kind of calm voice that made everything feel safe, and he often said the forest was loud with secrets, but the loud ones were usually harmless. I liked listening to him talk. He had this steady patience, like he had seen danger before and survived it. The day before everything went wrong, I found a trap hidden behind a fallen tree. It was a heavy steel device that snapped shut like a monster's jaw. I knew it was illegal, so I disarmed it and carried it back toward the tower. It was strange, though, because the forest around me felt too quiet. Even in the cold, you hear something in the woods, a bird, the rustle of small animals, the low wind moving through the branches. But when I lifted that trap, the silence locked in around me like a heavy blanket. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was nothing more than nerves. After I returned to the tower, the night settled in with its usual chill. I heated a simple dinner and wrote a letter to my fiancée while the small stove clicked softly behind me. I felt calm again. The world seemed normal. The forest was alive with its sounds again. I thought the silence earlier had been in my head, but then I heard something that made my stomach sink. A far-off crack. A gunshot. I stood still for a moment, listening, holding my breath. I lifted my binoculars, searching across the vast, dark forest, but saw nothing unusual. I called Renard on the radio. He said he had not heard anything, but he had found 2 traps that morning, which made him uneasy. He ended the call telling me to keep alert. Around 9:43 p.m., I heard the low rumble of a truck engine coming down the narrow dirt road. For a moment, I thought it might be Renard. Sometimes he brought warm coffee or canned soup, and we would sit under the stairs and talk about life. I stepped out with my lantern, expecting to see his familiar old pickup. But what came was a dark truck I had never seen before. 4 men stepped out, all carrying rifles. Their steps crunched slow and heavy on the gravel. One stayed near the truck, scanning the trees with sharp eyes, while the others grabbed traps and moved toward the forest. These men did not look like weekend hunters. They looked like trouble. I told myself I needed to stay calm. But I was young and foolish. Instead of calling the rangers like I should have, I took the rifle from inside the tower and walked down the stairs with my lantern. I thought maybe I could reason with them. I thought maybe they would listen. I was wrong. I barely got a word out before one man grabbed my shirt and shoved me so hard my lantern flew from my hand. I heard it crack on the ground. The rifle was kicked from my grip. Someone hit me in the stomach. Pain shot through me like fire, and I fell to my knees gasping. They grabbed my arms and dragged me into the trees. I was terrified, but something else struck me harder. The farther we walked, the quieter the forest became. At first, I thought the sound of blood pumping in my ears drowned everything out. But no, there was no wind, no birds, no sound at all. The forest felt dead, as if every living creature had decided to run. They dragged me for what felt like forever, but I knew it could not have been more than a mile. My legs shook. My breath came out in broken gasps. I kept thinking about my family. I kept thinking about my fiancée waiting for me to come home. They forced me onto my knees. I could feel cold moss under me. My heart thudded so hard I thought it might burst. One man pulled the bolt on his rifle. That sharp metal click cut through the night. I closed my eyes and whispered a prayer, believing those would be my last moments. Then the silence cracked open. Sirens screamed through the trees, flashing lights bouncing off the branches. Rangers. And behind them I saw Renard's truck. He must have tried to call me again, and when I did not answer, he drove straight toward the tower. The men panicked. They ran. The rangers ran after them. Renard reached me, his boots thudding against the earth. He pulled me up and helped me walk. He did not scold me. He did not shake his head or say I had been foolish. He only whispered that I was lucky. I wished the story ended there. But that was only the beginning of what the forest held. I returned to the tower that night, but sleep would not come. The wind had picked up, sharp against the walls. I kept hearing faint noises, soft thuds, like something walking on the stairs outside. I told myself it was the cold settling in the wood, I told myself everything was fine. Around 2:17 a.m., I heard a strange sound, a ringing. It was coming from my small phone. When I looked at the screen, my skin crawled. The number calling me was my own. I answered slowly, my voice barely a whisper. At first, I heard only breathing. Then a faint voice, my own voice, speaking in a dull, flat tone. It described exactly what I was doing, sitting on the edge of the bed, holding the phone with both hands, turning my head toward the window. I dropped the phone. It hit the floor and the sound stopped, but my heart raced so hard I thought I might pass out. I forced myself to breathe. I told myself I was tired, shaken, imagining things. But deep inside, I knew the forest was watching me. The next morning, I checked the security camera near the tower base. I had installed it 2 weeks earlier because of the increasing traps. When I rewound the footage, my stomach clenched. The entire night, from midnight to dawn, 3 tall, dark figures stood at the tree line, completely still, facing the tower. They did not move once, not even to turn their heads. I called the department. They sent someone to check, but when the officers arrived, the figures were gone. Nothing but deep prints in the soft earth. Every night after that felt different. The air felt heavier. Sometimes I heard footsteps in the cabin, though no one else was there. Sometimes I saw shadows move near the tower stairs, even when the wind was still. 3 days later, I went out on one of my long walks to check for traps. The sky felt strange that day, the clouds thick and low. The forest had that tense silence again. I tried to distract myself by scanning the woods for movement, but something kept pulling my attention back to the tower where my shift ended earlier. A creeping feeling that I needed to return. On my way back, I found something new. A narrow path I had never seen before. It cut through the trees like something had dragged heavy weight along it. I followed it slowly, telling myself I needed to report anything suspicious. The path led to an old house, almost swallowed by the forest. Its roof sagged, its windows broken. The door stood open like a mouth waiting for someone to walk in. Inside, the smell hit me first. Damp earth and rust. Then I saw the old wooden wardrobe standing against the wall. Something about it looked wrong. Its back panel was crooked, as if someone had pushed it from inside. I stepped closer. My breath shook as I pulled the doors open. Behind the hanging coats, there was a hole, a hidden room. My mind raced. People used to hide illegal hunting gear in hidden spots, but this felt different. This felt old. Inside the dark space, I found objects that made my skin crawl. Torn clothing, deep claw marks on the walls, a small box with metal tools inside, and a photograph of the tower where I worked, taken from a close distance, but I had never seen anyone near it. The picture was fresh, too fresh, too fresh. The silence around me grew so thick, I felt it pressing against my ears. I stepped back. Suddenly, something moved behind me. A shadow slid across the wall even though nothing stood between me and the doorway. My legs reacted before my mind did. I ran. When I reached the tower, the sun had already fallen. Shadows stretched across the ground like long fingers reaching for me. Renard called on the radio around 7:45 p.m. asking if I was all right. I told him about the house. He said he would check it at sunrise, but not to go back alone. That night, the air felt electric. I kept checking the stairs. I kept checking the windows. The camera showed nothing at first, but around 1:19 a.m. the figures returned, this time closer. They stood at the bottom of the stairs, heads tilted up as if listening. My phone began to ring again. My own number. I did not answer. The tower lights flickered. The air grew cold, colder than outside. My breath came out like smoke. Something scratched against the wood outside the cabin door. Slow, deliberate. I grabbed the emergency flare gun and pointed it at the door, praying it would stay shut. I prayed harder than I ever had. I felt like the forest itself was leaning in. Then everything went silent, not quiet. Silent, a dead silence that felt wrong in every way. I forced myself to check the camera. The figures were gone. But at the edge of the recording, for just a second, I saw something tall and thin moving between the trees. not walking, sliding. I could not stay until morning. I packed my things, grabbed the radio, and climbed down carefully. Every step felt like it might be my last. The forest was dark, thicker than normal. The trees felt closer. Halfway to my truck, I felt someone watching me. I turned slowly, and there at the edge of the trees stood a figure. Not a man, not an animal. Something in between, stretching too tall, its limbs wrong, its head slightly tilted as if curious. It did not move. It only watched. I tried not to run, but fear controlled me. I reached my truck, turned the engine, and drove until the tower disappeared behind me. I did not return after that night. I sent my resignation a week later. I learned that Renard went to check the house at sunrise. He never spoke about what he found. He only told me in a quiet voice that the forest near Longueuil had things older than law or reason. Years passed. I tried to forget. But sometimes, late at night, my phone rings once. No number. No sound, just breathing. And sometimes I dream of that wardrobe, the hidden room, and the photograph of the tower. I dream of the figures standing motionless until dawn. I dream of the forest that watched me leave, and deep down, I know it remembers me. I never thought the quiet town of Sherbrooke could hold something so dark, something that would stay with me for the rest of my life, something that would make me question every stranger who stepped too close, every shadow that stretched a little too long. Even now, years later, my hands shake when I drive past the edges of that park, the one that should have been peaceful, the one that tried to swallow me whole. Back then, I was a freshman at Bishop's University, shy, tired, and still learning how to live far from home. My boyfriend at the time lived across town, tucked deep inside the old neighborhoods where the streets curled like veins and the houses leaned close together as if whispering secrets. Now we live in a small apartment not far from that same area, and sometimes I stare out our window and remember what almost happened. That night, I had stayed at his place too long. We were watching a movie, something slow, something I planned to stay awake for but didn't. I passed out on his couch, and by the time I woke up, it was somehow 2:17 a.m. My eyes felt heavy, and my thoughts were soft around the edges. He offered to let me stay, but I had an early class and a shift at the campus cafe, so I insisted on driving home. I wish I had stayed. My route took me through the smaller roads outside the center of Sherbrooke, past the old brick buildings, over the tiny bridge by the St. Francois River, then up toward the large park that connected to the highway. The park was beautiful during the day, with long paths and tall trees that swayed like calm guardians. At night, it was a different creature. The lamps along the path were few, spread so far apart that most of the road lived in darkness. That night, I barely knew the area. I was still new to the city's strange twists and turns, still relying on instinct more than memory. My only real goal was to reach the highway and get back to campus before exhaustion swallowed me. I drove slowly, rubbing my eyes every few minutes, trying to keep myself awake. The houses grew scarce the closer I got to the park, and soon I felt like I was driving through a world that had forgotten people existed. The narrow road into the park curved sharply, and the darkness thickened like fog. My headlights cut through the black, and that's when I saw it. A golden sedan sat stopped in the middle of the road, not parked, not pulled over, just stopped. But it blocked almost everything, and no matter which direction I tried to pass, it would be a tight squeeze. For a moment, I thought maybe the driver had broken down. Maybe someone needed help. But I was alone, tiny, barely 100 pounds at the time, and I had learned from childhood not to trust anything that didn't feel right. This didn't feel right. I slowed down, squinting through the windshield, trying to see movement inside the car. But before I could make a decision, before I could even breathe, someone stepped into the light. A tall man rushed from the front of the sedan and waved his arms wildly as if trying to flag down a rescue. He didn't look frantic, though. He didn't look scared or hurt. There was something too calm in his movements, something rehearsed. He walked straight into the path of my car and blocked me. I locked my doors so fast the sound startled even me. He came closer, and now I could see his face under the beam of my headlights. Sharp cheekbones, Tired eyes, too thin smile. He leaned toward my window, pressing one hand against the glass. His lips moved, and even though my hearing has never been great, I could read what he said because he was so close. "Please, I need your phone. Please, help me." My stomach twisted hard, like it knew something my mind hadn't caught up with yet. I shook my head, raising my hand slightly so he could see. "No." His expression sharpened. Something flickered in his eyes, something wrong. He repeated his request, slower this time, pressing his palm harder against the window. The pressure made the glass tremble. I imagined it cracking, his hand reaching inside, dragging me out. "No," I mouthed again. I didn't care if I clipped him or scraped his car. I moved forward inch by inch, trying to pass the sedan by slipping into the oncoming lane. But he stepped in front of my bumper again, forcing me to stop. My heart thudded so loudly I could hear it over the hum of the engine. If he smashed the window, no one would hear me scream. There wasn't a house in sight. The nearest ones were hidden deep behind the trees, and the park swallowed sound like a living thing. I pressed harder on the gas, just enough to make the car lurch, enough to warn him that I wasn't staying. He stepped back, but not far. I turned sharply into the oncoming lane, scraping too close to his bumper, and pushed forward with no plan except to escape. As I slipped past the sedan, my headlights swept across the trees. That's when I saw them. 3 men pulling themselves out of the bushes. They wore matching dark shirts and jeans, and their faces twisted with something I can only describe as hunger. They weren't surprised to see me. They weren't confused. They were waiting. All 3 stared at me with the same cold expression, the kind that freezes your blood before your body understands why. I slammed my foot down on the gas pedal, and my car shot forward. The road jolted under me as I sped toward the highway entrance. I didn't look back, but I could feel their eyes on me through the trees. I didn't breathe until I reached the wide lights of the on-ramp. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold my phone when I tried to dial the police. They transferred me twice, maybe 3 times. No one wanted responsibility for that dark pocket of Sherbrooke. No one seemed to know who controlled that road near the park. Finally, someone agreed to send an officer. I asked the officer to call me back to tell me if they found the men or the sedan. That spot was part of my route, and I didn't want to wonder every night if someone was waiting again. The officer did call back. They found nothing. Not the sedan, not the men, not even footprints in the mud. I thought the night was over, that the fear could finally settle into memory. But 10 minutes after my call, another woman phoned the police. She reported the same thing, same road, same golden car, same man waving his arms. The police told me not to drive near the park at night anymore. My parents were terrified when I told them. My mom cried, and my dad almost drove to Sherbrooke himself. They were proud I didn't stop, but they were shaken by how close things came. We made a new rule. Anytime one of us drove home late, we had to send a text before leaving and another when we arrived. But the story didn't end there, because Sherbrooke was already hiding strange things long before that night. I just didn't know it yet. During my first month at the dorms, I discovered something impossible. My dorm key, the simple silver one they gave me at check-in, opened another door down the hall. When I pushed it open out of curiosity, I found a room identical to mine. Same layout, same furniture, same blanket folded at the end of the bed. Even the posters were the same, as if someone had copied my room perfectly, but the room wasn't registered to any student. And worse, someone had been living in it, clothes neatly folded, water bottle half empty, bed sheets wrinkled in the shape of a small body sleeping on the right side. Nobody at the university could explain it. Then there was the campus cleaner, an older man who had worked there for years. He found beds across the dorms that had clearly been slept in, even though those rooms weren't booked to anyone. When he checked the logs, the rooms didn't even exist in the system anymore. He tried reporting it. They told him it was a glitch. He quit 1 week later, and one of my professors, a quiet man with slow steps and gentle hands, received essays written in his own handwriting. Pages he never remembered writing, assignments from students who didn't exist. He stopped showing up to class after that. Sherbrooke had a way of bending reality, a quiet shifting that made the impossible feel normal until it turned dangerous. I started to wonder whether the men in the park were part of something older, something inside the town that kept repeating itself. Some nights, I had dreams that someone stood beside my bed, not touching, just watching. And every time I woke up, my dorm key was lying on the floor, even when I swore I hadn't touched it. I tried to ignore it all, until one winter night when I passed near the park again. I wasn't supposed to be there at night, but classes ran late, and I wanted the fastest way home. I drove slowly, my breath fogging the air as fear curled inside my chest. The park looked different under the snow, cleaner somehow, almost peaceful. But when I turned the corner, my headlights revealed a golden sedan stopped in the middle of the road, the same car, the same spot. I froze, gripping the wheel so hard my fingers felt numb. A tall man stepped out again, waving his arms. His face was the same, unchanged by time. But this time, I wasn't alone. Behind me, in the mirror, I saw the silhouettes of 3 men stepping out of the trees. My heartbeat slammed against my ribs. My breaths came in short bursts. The world felt too quiet, as if the snow absorbed every sound. I should have driven. I should have turned around. But something inside me whispered to stay still, to observe, to understand. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was curiosity. The tall man approached, and I realized something horrifying. He didn't look older. He didn't look colder. He looked exactly as he had the first night. As if he hadn't changed at all. Frozen. Preserved. Waiting. The men behind me approached slowly, their shapes long and sharp under the moonlight. I felt the air around me tighten as if the night itself held its breath. Then one of them spoke, a voice like cold metal scraping across stone. "You came back." His voice wasn't cruel or angry. It was almost relieved, as if he had been expecting me. I didn't wait. I slammed my foot on the gas. The tires fishtailed on the ice, but my car shot forward, swerving past the golden sedan. I heard someone shout behind me, but I didn't look. I didn't look until I reached the lights of the city again. When I finally stopped my car and tried to breathe, I looked down and saw something on my passenger seat. My dorm key, the one I had lost 2 weeks earlier. I don't know how it got there. I don't know who put it there. And I never told the police about the second encounter because I knew they wouldn't find anything again. They never do. Sometimes, late at night, when I drive near Sherbrooke's quiet corners, I feel eyes watching me from behind the trees. Sometimes I hear footsteps outside my apartment even though no one is there. And sometimes, when the wind is still, I hear a voice whisper something I wish I never understood. You came back once. You will come back again. I woke with a memory that still shakes me, and even now I wonder how I survived, because the night I vanished in Saguenay rewrote the way I understood fear. My name is Lorne, and when I was a child, my world split in half the moment my parents walked away from each other, leaving cracks that never healed. I lived with my mother far from Quebec, while my father stayed in a small town near the Saguenay River, a place where the winter wind sounded like voices in the dark. I visited him during school breaks, even though he was the kind of man who made promises like snowflakes that melted before they touched the ground. His past was thick with rumors. People whispered that he owed money to dangerous men, that he made deals in the shadows, that he ran from trouble instead of facing it. I didn't understand any of that back then, because I was just a kid who wanted a father who kept me safe. But what happened during one visit changed everything. And even after all these years, the cold of that time still sits inside my bones. It began on a quiet afternoon in a tiny park behind my father's street. I was playing with my cousin, tossing snow into the air, watching it sparkle like broken glass under the milky sun. Saguenay winters did not forgive, but I had grown used to the sting, used to the emptiness of the sky, used to pretending everything was normal. That day I heard a car pull beside the playground. The engine growled low, almost like it was trying to hide. A man stepped out and waved to me. I recognized him only as someone who had visited my father before, laughing too loudly, talking too fast, smelling like cold metal. Without thinking, I walked toward him. My cousin shouted my name, but I ignored it, because children trust the wrong voices sometimes. The man bent down and said he needed help finding my father's house. I believed him. I climbed into the car. The door shut with a hollow thud that felt like the first sign I had made a mistake. At first, I tried to guide him, pointing toward the rows of houses, the small grocery store, the corner with the broken lamp. But he drove the wrong way, turning toward the highway instead of the neighborhood. Snow began to fall harder. The sky dimmed. My breath fogged the window. I told him he was going the wrong direction, but he didn't answer. His jaw was tight, and his eyes flicked toward the rearview mirror like he expected someone to follow him. I thought we were just taking a strange detour, but the dread rose slowly, like cold water filling my chest. The houses disappeared behind us. The pine trees crowded the road. We drove toward the city, toward the industrial edges of Saguenay, where the mills glowed like giant ghosts in the fog. When he finally stopped, it was in front of a house I had never seen. The windows were covered with boards. The porch sagged. A flickering light moved inside, like someone was walking with a candle that refused to stay alive. He told me to wait. I did, because fear had not settled yet inside my spine. When he came back, he told me I had to come in. His voice was sharp now, thin and dangerous. I followed him because I couldn't imagine anything worse than being alone in the car. Inside the house, the air smelled like rotting wood and old smoke. My shoes stuck to the floor. I heard whispers coming from the kitchen, low, broken words I couldn't understand. A woman with dark circles under her eyes grabbed my arm and pulled me to a room down the hallway. She told me to sit. Her voice trembled. She brought me a sandwich with stale bread, and even though I wasn't hungry, I forced myself to eat because the silence in the room felt heavy, almost watching me. The woman muttered things about needing patience, about keeping quiet, about my father owing more than he could ever pay. I didn't understand. I waited for my father to walk through the door. I convinced myself he would show up before sunset. I convinced myself that this was temporary, but then night came, and no one came to see me. The air grew colder. The house creaked like it was breathing. I lay on the thin mattress and listened to footsteps pacing outside the door. They didn't sound human at times, almost dragging, almost limping. Once, just after 2:17 a.m., I heard knocking inside the walls, like someone trapped behind them was begging to be freed. I pulled the blanket over my head. I held my breath. I prayed the house would stop whispering. The next morning, I cried until someone finally opened the door. The same woman appeared, shouting that I smelled bad, that I was a nuisance, that my father was coming tonight after work. She didn't offer a bath, didn't offer comfort. I sat there, cold and terrified, waiting for a man who had already abandoned me long before this day. Time inside that house twisted. It felt like I lived there for months, though it was only days. I lost track of hours. Shadows moved where they shouldn't. At night, I heard voices under the floorboards. I heard footsteps outside my window, even though we were on the second floor. I heard someone breathing inside the closet. Every winter storm in Saguenay can make the wind scream through the cracks of any house, but this wasn't wind. This was something else, something that wanted me afraid. One night, I listened to men whispering in the hallway. They argued about debts, about fear, about someone coming for them. The man who brought me here said my father wasn't worth saving, that he had run away, that I was the only thing left to hold on to. I didn't know what that meant, but I knew it wasn't good. On the third night, snow hammered the windows like stones. The house shook under the weight of the storm. I slept only in moments, waking at distant sounds, footsteps in the hall, a door slamming, the long, horrible scrape of something dragged across the floor. Once, I heard a scream far away, but no one reacted to it. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe the storm swallowed it whole. Then something else happened, something no one in Saguenay ever talks about, because the North holds secrets inside ice and silence. That night, after 7:45 p.m., I heard tapping at the window, soft at first, then louder. I told myself it was a branch, but branches don't call your name. I froze and stared at the window. A pale shape moved past the glass. something with fingers too long, too thin. I blinked, and it vanished into the storm. I covered my ears. I curled on the mattress. I counted numbers until dawn. After that night, the house fell silent in a new way, like everyone was waiting. The men stopped arguing. The woman avoided eye contact. Even the strange noises in the walls went quiet, as if the house itself was holding its breath. On the last day, the woman let me take a shower. The water was freezing. I stood there trembling, not sure if I was washing away fear or sinking deeper into it. I ate little, only plain food that felt like cardboard. My stomach twisted constantly. The woman's hands kept shaking when she spoke. She told me again that my father was coming, but she didn't sound like she believed it. By then, I didn't either. Later that night, around midnight, the sound of a car engine cut through the storm. The men inside the house jumped up. They ran to the windows. They argued. One of them grabbed a knife. Someone else whispered that this was the moment they had been dreading. The front door burst open and the cold rushed in. I heard footsteps pounding up the stairs. I heard my name shouted in a voice that cracked through the dark like lightning. It was my mother. She had driven across the country when my flight home never happened, when my father never answered, when every sign pointed to something being wrong. She had borrowed money from people she trusted and people she feared. She had tracked down the last person who saw my father, who told her he was hiding with criminals who wanted him gone. She stepped into that house like a storm inside a storm, fearless in a way only a desperate mother can be. Someone opened my door. I blinked in the dim light. I smelled her perfume before I saw her face. That smell felt like warmth, like safety, like the sun after weeks of blizzards. I ran to her, and she held me so tight that I thought my ribs would crack. But I didn't care. I never wanted her to let go. She walked me down the stairs. The men didn't stop her. They only watched, their faces pale, their eyes hollow. The storm outside seemed to grow louder as we stepped onto the porch, as if the wind itself wanted us to leave. Snowflakes hit my skin like tiny sparks. My mother pushed me into the car and started the engine. When we drove away, I looked back. The house seemed alive, its windows dark, its shadows stretched across the frozen ground. In one upstairs window, I swear I saw a shape watching us. Something tall. Something still. Something the storm didn't touch. When I blinked, it was gone. My mother never went to the police. She said the truth was tangled, painful, and dangerous. My father never apologized. He vanished from our lives for years. I didn't see him again until I was older, but by then the fear he caused had already carved its place inside me. Life moved on, but Saguenay never left me. The sound of snow hitting windows still makes me shiver. I don't trust strange cars. I don't trust easy smiles. I don't trust houses that creak too much in winter. Even now, grown as I am, I sometimes dream of that place. In my dreams, the house is waiting. The walls whisper. The tapping returns, and at 2:17 a.m. I hear my name again, spoken by a voice that sounds like wind, but isn't. Some nights, fishermen in Saguenay pull up strange things from the river, phones still ringing underwater. Voices trapped in the ice, footprints leading into frozen water, but none leading out. People say winter plays tricks. People say the north is lonely. People say the past can't follow you forever. But I know better. Some houses remember their ghosts, and some ghosts remember you. I never thought a quiet place like Levis could hide something that watched people the way shadows watch weak firelight. I learned that truth the hard way, and even now, when the wind hits the windows at night, I still hear that moment when my world split into before and after. I grew up in a small neighborhood on the river's edge. The kind of place where everyone waved at everyone and people believed danger happened somewhere else. My mother never trusted that calm. She worked late nights as a caregiver and had seen enough broken people to know darkness didn't always stay outside. She warned me again and again to be careful, but back then I was a moody teenager who thought warnings were insults. I walked like I feared nothing, moved like nothing could touch me, and acted like safety was a cage someone locked around me. My name is Mira, and this is the truth I have been trying to forget for years. I had been taking weekend art classes across the river in Quebec City, and every evening I took the train back to Levis. The walk from the station to our apartment wasn't far, and I had done it my entire life. I knew every crack in the pavement, every flickering streetlight, every house whose porch smelled like old wood. But my mother hated that walk, especially with the strange news spreading around town: break-ins, missing pets, mugging attempts, shadows seen near the abandoned riverside warehouses. She insisted I call her if it ever got dark. We fought about it constantly. I said she was treating me like a child. She said she was trying to keep me alive. Neither of us ever backed down. The compromise was simple. If the sun was gone, she would come get me, no arguments. But that one night I refused. I don't even remember why I was boiling with anger. Maybe someone at class annoyed me. Maybe I was tired of everything. Maybe I just wanted control over something in my life. I stepped off the train into cold rain that slapped my face and soaked through my jacket, and the moment I saw the dark sky, I knew I was supposed to call her. Instead, I shoved my old CD player deeper into my bag, pushed my headphones over my ears, and stormed into the night. The streets glowed with wet reflections, puddles stretching the lights into trembling lines. My music was loud, roaring in my skull, drowning my thoughts. I walked faster than usual, not out of fear but out of stubborn rage. I wanted the whole world to know I didn't need anyone. There was one corner I hated though, even during the day: overgrown hedges wrapped around an empty lot where an unfinished building once stood. The city abandoned it after a fire, and now only charred concrete and rusted beams remained. There were no streetlights for a short stretch, just darkness thick enough to swallow shapes whole. People in town whispered about seeing strange movements there, like shadows shifting when nothing was around. Earlier that week, a night worker from the Riverside docks reported seeing lights flicker inside one of the old abandoned buildings, even though they had been sealed for years. Others claimed to have seen faces in cracked windows that vanished when they looked again. I ignored all of that. I thought adults exaggerated everything. As I approached the hedge-covered bend, the rain suddenly softened, like even the storm was holding its breath. I kept walking, thinking about nothing except how angry I still was, how childish the whole rule felt, how stupid it would be to call my mother for something as simple as a walk. I stepped into the dark patch. Something moved. Before I could even react, a figure exploded out of the bushes beside me, the sound of shaking leaves drowned only by the slam of my heart. A long kitchen knife glinted in the faint distant light, and the person's hood hid their face completely. They smelled of sharp medicinal alcohol, like a hospital room rotting from the inside. I froze. My CD player slipped out of my hand, crashed against the pavement, and shattered. And that broke something in me. All my anger, all the frustration, all the teenage fury that had been simmering inside me erupted like fire. Instead of terror, I felt a violent, stupid rage. I screamed at the figure, shoving them backward with a strength I didn't even know I had. Words spilled out, rage-filled, wild, furious insults that made no sense. I yelled that I was sick of everything, that this was the worst day of my life, that I was done being pushed around, even by someone with a knife. I bent to pick up my broken CD player, half expecting the blade to pierce my back. But when I rose, the figure was gone. Vanished. No footsteps, no sound, nothing but the wind and rain and my own shaking breath. I stood alone in the darkness, gripping the shattered pieces of the one thing I loved most. Anger drowned out fear. I walked home muttering threats into the storm, turning back every few seconds to shout into the night even though the figure had disappeared. When I got home, my mother was waiting at the door, furious and terrified. We fought again, words sharp enough to cut skin, but I said nothing about what had actually happened. If I told her, she would remind me she was right, and at that time, pride mattered more to me than truth. But later, when I showered, the hot water hit my back, and my adrenaline was gone, and my mind began replaying everything. The knife, the smell, the silence, the silence. I collapsed onto the shower floor, trembling. I realized I had come seconds from dying, and the only thing I cried about was my broken CD player. The next few days were uneasy. Something changed in me. I walked faster, slept less, double-checked the door twice every night. I kept thinking about why the attacker ran, why he didn't stab me when I crouched down, why he didn't make a sound, why he vanished without footsteps. Then the town woke up to horror. 3 days later, a woman from our neighborhood, someone I knew from Sunday school years ago, was found dead in the abandoned lot behind that same hedge, stabbed, left in the wet dirt like a discarded doll. My mother was on the phone when I overheard the truth. The police believed a serial killer had been prowling affluent parts of Levis, attacking young adults walking alone, hiding in dark corners near the river. The attacks had been happening for months, but the police kept details quiet to avoid panic. Suddenly, everything made sense. I hadn't been mugged. I had been hunted, and I had walked straight into the killer's hands. For weeks after the murder, the town changed. People locked doors they never locked before, kids rushed home before sunset, and neighbors whispered about shadows near the abandoned warehouses by the river. A night worker swore he saw lights glowing inside one of those buildings, even though there was no electricity left in them. A delivery driver said he found signatures on packages from people who had died months earlier. A woman downtown claimed her reflection moved slower than she did, lagging behind like it was watching her instead of copying. It felt like the whole town was being pulled into something dark and hungry. I tried to pretend life was normal again, but the feeling of being watched followed me everywhere. When I walked to school, I felt someone behind me even when the street was empty. When I washed my face in the morning, I kept my eyes low because I was terrified my reflection wouldn't move the way I did. At night, I heard soft clicks near my window, like metal tapping glass. Then something worse happened. One evening, while helping my mother organize old boxes, we found a bag of unsent mail she had forgotten to drop off weeks before. On top of the pile was a small package meant for a neighbor who had passed away earlier in the year. Her name was written by hand. The handwriting was the same as the signature the delivery driver described. A chill slid through me. I asked my mother who had sent it. She said it came from an address near the old riverside warehouses, a place no one lived anymore. We argued about calling the police. She said it might be nothing, but deep down I knew it wasn't nothing. It was connected. Everything was connected. That night, unable to sleep, I walked to the kitchen for water. It was 3:17 a.m. When I passed by the living room window and saw something across the street, a shadow stood behind the hedge. Still, waiting, watching. I stepped back, but the silhouette didn't move. It tilted its head like it recognized me. In the faint light, I saw a glint. Metal. A knife. A knife. My breath froze in my throat. My hands shook so hard I almost dropped the glass. I turned away to call for my mother, and in the reflection of the window, I saw something impossible. The shadow raised the knife in the reflection first. My body turned slower, almost 2 seconds slower. My reflection moved like it was living a different time, following its own rules, warning me of something before I even reacted. I blinked. The shadow across the street was gone. Nothing but wind and the rustling hedge remained. I didn't sleep for days after that. The police never caught the killer. People say he moved on to another city. Some believe he drowned in the river and his spirit prowls Levis at night. Others whisper that he never left, that he hides in the abandoned buildings where lights flicker without power. But I know the truth. He didn't leave because he was finished. He left because someone else had taken interest. Something older, something that watched reflections and lived between time. Something that stood behind hedges and waited for foolish teenagers who thought darkness was an exaggeration. Sometimes, when I walk past the river at night, I see lights flicker behind shattered windows, like someone pacing inside. Sometimes, when I wash my face, my reflection still lags by a second, as if remembering that night. And sometimes, when the world goes quiet, I hear the soft clink of metal brushing against glass. I survived the killer, but I don't think I survived the thing that followed him. I never thought a quiet night in Trois-Rivières could turn into something that still shakes inside me like a cold hand gripping my ribs, but I learned that even small towns can hide storms you never see coming. I grew up in a family that moved from place to place because my father worked odd jobs, the type no one wants but someone must do, and every winter felt colder than the last. When we finally settled in a tiny house on a narrow street in Trois-Rivières, I believed we had found a place to breathe, a place where shadows stayed where they belonged. I worked at a small riverside motel after school, a place where the walls were thin and the nights felt heavier than the days, but the job paid enough. They called me Milo. I never liked my name, but it was the only one I had. One night changed everything. I was playing video games upstairs before I drifted off, half awake and half dreaming, when the doorbell rang. It felt sharp, wrong, like someone pulling a thread inside my skull. It was around 7:45 p.m., the kind of time where most lights on our street fade behind curtains, not when strangers should be standing at the door. I stood from my bed and walked halfway down the stairs before my mind caught up to my feet. Who rings a doorbell in Trois-Rivières at this hour? Not friends, not neighbors, not anyone with good intentions. I froze on the steps and let the silence breathe. Then, exactly 1 minute later, the bell rang twice, fast and impatient. I turned and stepped quietly back to the hallway upstairs. My parents opened their bedroom door and stared at me. All I could do was shrug because I had no words for the uneasiness crawling up my arms. Then the banging started. Not tapping, not knocking, full body weight. My mother jumped at the first hit, covering her mouth. My father's face tightened, not afraid, just confused in a way that made everything feel worse. He walked downstairs, each step slow, careful, and pressed his eye to the peephole. He whispered something sharp under his breath, something I couldn't make out. Then he opened the door. Standing there was our neighbor from the right side of our house, a man named Victor, someone I never trusted. He lived alone, worked odd hours, and moved like he was always listening for something behind him. His clothes were wrinkled and his eyes were too wide. My father asked softly what he needed, but before he could finish, Victor exploded into a roaring argument. He screamed that this house was his, that we stole it, that we had no right to be inside. His words were wild, broken, echoing off the hallway walls like something not human was speaking through him. My father didn't waste time. Annoyance replaced his fear. He shut the door in Victor's face, locking it quickly. We thought that was the end. It wasn't.